Imagine that you control a drone. The drone looks at that reality where it is, sends me information, and I get the conscious experience of what the drone is seeing. That conscious experience is not in my body, it's in my consciousness.
A scientific theory that basically states that our body is operated like a drone from a conscious quantum field, which would mean that experience, qualia, is not in your head.
The qualia do not exist in the body, they exist in the field.
Okay, people will find this crazy idea.
It is crazy, but it is much closer to the truth.
Federico Faggin invented the first CPU, the touchpad, and worked on the first neural nets, which gave him the hope of creating conscious AI.
It took me 30 years to figure out that mathematics is created by consciousness, and therefore I cannot explain consciousness with mathematics. Many physicists think that there is emergent properties in the purely classical world. It cannot be. Emergentism requires quantumness.
Like some other renowned physicists, Faggin is convinced that consciousness cannot be a classical phenomenon and has to be quantum. But his theory of quantum consciousness goes beyond any theories on the table.
We have to go way beyond Schrödinger's equation. We have to go into Dirac's equation, but even beyond that, we have to go to quantum fields and quantum information. And quantum information goes beyond the concepts of quantum fields. In fact, the only physicist that has been able to show that quantum physics derives from quantum information is an Italian physicist, Giacomo Mauro D'Ariano. He showed that you can derive all the equations of quantum physics from quantum bits.
Federico Faggin reached out to Mauro D'Ariano, and together they published a paper, and Federico wrote this book. If they are right, not only will they have an accurate theory of consciousness, they will also solve the mystery of the interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Quantum information is the representation of inner experience, and the collapse of the wave function is the representation of the free will. What more do you want?
That's crazy, that's crazy. Let's try and really understand this. Welcome to the Essentia Foundation's YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and may I ask you to like and subscribe, as it really helps us to grow our channel. Now, this interview was recorded when Federico visited the Netherlands to present his new book, Irreducible. A link to the book and scientific papers are in the description below. And in his book, Federico describes how a deeply personal experience led him to start investigating consciousness. Therefore, I found it interesting to start our conversation with this personal experience. Of course, after that, we go into the theory itself. In the chapter marks below, you can see the topics we discussed. Now, without further ado, here is Silicon hero and consciousness pioneer Federico Faggin. Federico, can you tell us about a pivotal moment in your life, namely the experience you had at Lake Tahoe, do I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
During your Christmas holidays of 1990.
Yeah, I wasn't happy, and I had reached everything that the world says that if you do all this stuff, you should be happy, and I wasn't. I realized that I was faking being happy because I needed to, because I was running a company, I had to be enthusiastic and everything else, but I was dying inside. So what's going on? What's wrong with this picture? And so consciousness then was, became center stage in my life, understanding that this consciousness somehow was also connected with feeling, desperate inside. So what's going on? So I wanted to understand what consciousness is. So that's when, and I wanted to understand it for my own sake, for not to do something about it, not to monetize, not to make a new technology, because before it was all about, doing something, and now all of a sudden I turn my attention inside because of the suffering. And it was in this climate that I had this extraordinary experience of consciousness. Now I can go to this Tahoe night, in 1990 during the Christmas holidays. We had a home up in Tahoe, which is Lake Tahoe is a beautiful lake, 2,500 meters. and there are mountains, and skiing is great. And so, one night I woke up midnight, I was thirsty, went to get a glass of water, and went back to bed, and was just waiting for, go back to sleep, thinking nothing. And all of a sudden, out of the chest, just energy was coming out of my chest, but it was love. And it was love that was never felt before. It was love that was coming from me. How can love come from me? I mean, it was unthinkable that love could come from me. And it was 10,000 times more powerful than any love that I felt before. I mean, in fact, I never felt that love because it was unconditional love. Now I have a name for it. It was love, period. Yes, it was coming from me, but it was love. And it was light. It was a white light scintillating. It was, like sparkles, and it was coming out. And then it explodes and it's everywhere. But it's everywhere, but my consciousness is there too. So not only my consciousness is within me, but it's also outside of me. And all of a sudden I realize I am that. So I am the observer and the observer simultaneously. But I retain my point of view. I retain my identity. I was still the same kid of 5 years old or 3 years old kid that I was then, and that I am now. And so that identity, the only thing of me that remained was that point of view. And then I realized, oh my God, this stuff is the stuff of which everything is made. Everything comes from this stuff. And my body was hot, it was vibrating, like the cells of my body were resonating with this thing. Of course, the emotion, the feelings was love, joy, and peace. Because this stuff felt like, that's me. I'm at home. This is me. So I'm finally home. This is this is home. Mm-hmm. But so it was all mixed up. So you cannot separate this stuff. Love, joy, and peace. And then the mind was aligned, saying this is the stuff of everything is made. So I'm everything, but also the observer of everything. So I'm a point of view of one with which one knows itself. And now is the centerpiece of this new theory of consciousness that we may talk later about.
Yeah, beautiful.
I was a physicalist. I thought, basically, materialist because I study physics, and everybody knows the consciousness comes from matter, perhaps. We don't know how, but has to come from matter. Where else can it come from? So, that was the mindset that I was. So, all of a sudden, how can, no, this is before matter somehow, so this must be the beginning of it. So, that changed it, and that started me in a completely different, I went orthogonal in terms of my personal development and thinking while I was running synaptics, so that was fine, but I spent from that point on 30 to 40% of my time trying to understand what happened, and studying, doing meditation, figuring, anything that I could understand to understand what happened. But that picture actually is the end. Now I can explain with this new theory of consciousness, I can explain exactly what happened and exactly why that is correct. Every single one of us is a field that is both the observer, the observed, and the actor. Every one of us is a field, and it doesn't exist this field does not exist in space and time. Space-time exists within these fields that we are, is us. So, this changes the paradigm, right? But we need a change of paradigm because otherwise, if we are machines like scientism is telling us, we are going to be taken over by the machines, the artificial intelligence that people will control powerful people will control, and through those machines they can control us if we don't change our mind of who we are.
It will become a sort of self-fulfilling
Will
prophecy.
become a self-fulfilling prophecy because we have not done the personal work to understand who we are. And we are not machines. The body is a machine, but it's a machine that is infinitely more complex than the computers because it is a quantum and classical machine. It's not a machine like a computer. Just to, it's simple to understand it. Every cell of my body is a part whole of the body. What do I mean by that? Every cell of my body has the genome of the egg that created the entire organism. So every part of my body has the potential knowledge of the whole. In this case, the whole is just the body. So we are holographic. We are holographic. We are made of parts whole. We have 50 trillion cells, each has the potential knowledge of the whole organism. So a cell, which is a part, can change within its own life by taking advantage of the potential knowledge of the whole. That's why epigenetics exists. 20 years ago, if you said epigenetics, you would have put into the corner as a crazy guy. Okay, now we know that epigenetic exists. Why? Because every part is a part whole. So we, as human beings, we are fields which are part whole of one, the totality of what exists. Same pattern repeated at different scales.
Very nice. We are going deeper right now. And I think good for people to understand, this comes from the architect of the first microprocessor. If we have that cell, that part whole, as you mentioned, and we have a modern day microprocessor that many people attribute sort of the same intelligence or complexity to, because that's the idea, right? Because it's just so many connections, so many computing power. So many people think we will achieve sort of cell-like and then of course organism-like intelligence. Can you just on the ground level make that comparison, the cell versus the microprocessor?
Yeah, a microprocessor is made of switches. On, off, on, off, on, off. What does a switch know about the whole computer? Nothing. It doesn't know anything. All that it could possibly know is that it's open or closed. But it can do nothing else. Every cell of my body is connected to the whole through these quantum fields, because a cell is a quantum classical thing. It's not a classical thing. It has been studied as biochemistry by biologists. It's an informational system of a kind that we have still to understand the foundation. It's quantum and classical. Quantum and classical, nobody understands how life works. It goes way beyond what we understand. We think it's a mechanism. And that's because those cells remain connected with the fields, because they're made of particles. And quantum physics is telling us that particles are not objects. Particles are states of a field. They cannot be taken away from the fields. They are not separable from the fields. They are like a wave of the sea cannot be taken out of the sea.
But what many people, I think, and this we really need to clarify, I think, okay, in a cell we have proteins bumping around, which are in the end complex molecules. In a computer we have electrons that are also particles. What exactly makes the molecules, the particles within the cell quantum classical and a computer purely classical? Because I'd say, okay, aren't there quantum effects as well in computers that connect them to that field you were talking about?
Yeah, but the quantum effects are incoherent and they cancel out. So the quantumness is canceled out. The bit is the average of quantum phenomena. They cancel out, and then therefore first of all, the bit is not a physical thing, it's an abstraction that we have created. what is 0 and what is 1, we have determined. And as long as within the system, the 0 and the 1 as the simplest possible symbols can be recognized as 0 and 1, that's all that is needed. So if you maintain that coherence, but it's a classical coherence, because the 0 and the 1 are classical information that can be reproduced. A quantum bit cannot be reproduced. A quantum bit, when you measure the quantum bit, you get 0 or 1 in the direction in which you measure it. But you have to set the direction, because if you don't know the direction, any direction that you choose, you will find 0 or 1. The Olivos theorem says that the maximum information that you can get from a quantum bit is a classical bit. The quantum bit cannot be known. The not cloning theorem says that you cannot clone even a quantum bit.
Yeah, once we want to know the quantum state, it will collapse in a state which is a 0 or 1, and we are in a classical world.
Yeah, but
information.
you are in classical. So quantum information cannot be reproduced. Quantum information cannot be reproduced. Classical information can be reproduced. We are quantum fields. What we feel within can be represented by quantum information. But what we feel goes beyond the representation. The representation is mathematics, is the map. What we feel is the territory, is what we feel is only within the field. That's how we know. The meaning is within us, is within the field, is not in the information. Physics, the information in physics has no meaning. And the problem with the current worldview is that if you start with this type of information, there is no meaning, then you cannot conclude that the universe is without meaning and purpose just because you have started that way. But in fact, if you start with quantum information, people cannot explain why you cannot copy quantum information. Why can I not copy quantum information? Then the new theory says consciousness and free will are foundational, cannot be explained with anything simpler, but if you start with that, you can explain why quantum physics must be the way it is. Exactly the upside. Again, the silicon gate technology turning around the problem. You go from here to there instead of going from there to here. And there is collapse of the wave function, which are free will's decision of the field, of the various fields that are interacting and creating this thing that emerges from these fields. The particle is not separable from the fields. It's integral to the fields. Then they forget about it. Then they think of the particle a little ball. The people that study biology think that the cell is classical. It is not classical.
Yeah, they think of the rule of large numbers, right? Because quantum effects are on a sort of subatomic particle level, and it filters out, it cancels out, and then we have the classical world, which is again deterministic. Cancel out.
Inside the cell, they work together to create these structures that they don't even understand that's going on right now. They don't understand how the cell works as a totality. You know, we are instructed not to understand, and we are going through blinders. We don't understand. I mean, there is, for example, about 10 years ago, or so, a few physicists and biologists, but people with a strong knowledge of physics, started saying, hey, but life, there must be something quantum in life. Oh, forget it, not possible, okay? And they were ostracized, and, eventually there is a very small cadre of, quantum biologists called now, people that's trying to understand life as a quantum phenomenon. They are still ostracized, but at least now they have some money to do research. But for 10 years, it was like, everybody knows that, these dogmas of the sort of the orthodoxy of science, are, impeding us to really make progress, and it's time to stop this. But there is a strong desire for for this orthodoxy to keep this materialist and reductionist framework that has shown that is no longer valid. Everybody knows. I mean, people that really think, but they don't want that because it's power.
And how? But if we go back, I really like when you talk about sort of, because I think that's the real nuts and bolts. We go into the eukaryotic cell, and we see the proteins, we have the DNA, we have all the action going on in a cell, which is tremendously complex. Yep. But we think we can reduce it to first principles because we know what those molecules do to each other, and then it's just a rule of large numbers, which will give us sort of the action of the cell and will build up to the organism. Yeah. But you are saying that on that level, quantum effects are playing a role which make action within the cell indeterministic and even a free will decision?
Absolutely, but the free will decision is not in the cell, it's in the fields that control the cell. See, I was mentioning before, right, that a particle, like an electron, doesn't exist separate from the fields. It's a state of the field. From physics point of view, ontology is in the field, it's not in the particles, because the particles, are integral to the field, so they come and they go. If a particle existed, it wouldn't disappear, right? But an electron can appear and disappear. But it is a state of a field that appears or disappears. There is nothing more. There is no particle. But physicists, the particle physicists, but I see the particles. No, you don't see the particles. You see the effect of the states of the field on this classical world. And then you see something, but that is not a particle. That is the effect of something that was amplified in a huge number of times to give you what you call a particle.
And to clarify this for people, when we talk about quantum and classical, the classical world is the world of matter that we know that seems to behave deterministically. And the quantum world, of course, is a world of probabilities, right? Yes. Of multiple states being possible at once. And how exactly do they relate if you say quantum classical? So what bit of our body is classical? Of course, my body, it doesn't evaporate while I'm sitting here, so that would make it classical, but my thoughts are quantum?
Yes, okay. So first of all, there is no clear boundary between classical and quantum. In other words, we again want to put things into boxes. That's the first mistake. There are no separate boxes. One is holistic. The reality, deeper reality is holistic, means it's not made of separable parts. And it's not made of separable concepts, which is even deeper. So even true or false is an approximation of reality valid under certain conditions. Like 1 and 0 are valid for a certain temperature and pressure of the computer. If you change the temperature, it doesn't work anymore, because that distinction can no longer be valid in a world where there is a continuity. There is, everything is connected with everything else. So, but we don't want that world because you cannot control that world. So the problem now is a problem of power and control behind this desire to have a deterministic and reductionistic world, which is the materialist philosophy, which is it's time to abandon that, because quantum physics already is saying that that doesn't work. According to quantum physics, the universe is holistic, is not made of separable parts. Everything is connected. Everything is connected from the inside. But according to most physicists, there is no inside, because everything, they think that all that exists is actually what you can measure. But that is not possible. Nobody can understand why quantum computers work, because their actual operation cannot occur in space-time. It must occur in what is called Hilbert space. But Hilbert space is supposed to be a mathematical abstraction. So how can you do operations in an abstract space of mathematics? You see, it's incoherent. But nobody wants to think deeply about this stuff, because nobody has ever taught how to think deeply about stuff. They want to solve the problem. Give me an equation, I'll solve the equations. But the equations are created by consciousness. It is consciousness that creates mathematics, not mathematics that creates consciousness. It took me 30 years to figure out that mathematics is created by consciousness, and therefore I cannot explain consciousness with mathematics. And I realized that I was trying to do the same because I was taught that way. I had to turn it around. Again, turn it around.
And we can only touch, let's say, but we can touch sort of at the outer surface of consciousness with mathematics. It's our own understanding of ourselves. So would the Schrödinger's wave function, which describes sort of the state of a quantum system, is that touching on the outside of consciousness? Is that as close as we can get with mathematics?
Of course. In fact, we have to go way beyond Schrödinger's equation. We had to go into Dirac's equation, but even beyond that, we had to go to quantum fields. And quantum information. And quantum information goes beyond the concepts of quantum fields. In fact, the only physicist that's been able to show that quantum physics derives from quantum information is an Italian physicist, Giacomo Mauro D'Ariano, University of Pavia, and it took me 15, 20 years to do that, and show that you can derive all the equations of quantum physics from quantum bits. So you remember probably about John Wheeler, it from bit. Yeah, he had the original intuition that information had to be more profound, more deeper than matter. It from bit. So the bit was deeper, but he should have said it from qubit, but never mind. Because the deeper information is quantum information. And D'Ariano and his collaborators prove that you can derive quantum physics from quantum information. Yeah. So quantum information now becomes the ontology based on D'Ariano's work.
What would be a way for people to understand what quantum information really is? So
is basically, instead of having bits, arrangements of bits, you have arrangements of quantum bits. A quantum bit, imagine a quantum bit as one of an infinite possibilities that can be represented as a point on the surface of a sphere. So you have a sphere, every point on the surface of a sphere, which would correspond to a direction in 3D, is one of the possible states. So a qubit implies an infinity of states, but when you make a measurement, all you can find 0, 1. So, and you cannot, when you make a measurement, you disturb this quantum bit, so you don't, you basically, and you disturb it in the direction in which you make the measurement, and you get 0 or 1. And that's it. Yeah. In any direction that you measure, you get 0, 1, but you don't get 0, 1 repeatedly, you get it with some probability. So the quantum physics doesn't tell you what the next state is. It only can tell you the probability of all the possible states that you can measure. So in the case of a quantum bit, it tells you, if you measure in this direction, let's say, it tells you the probability that you get a 0 or a 1, but it doesn't tell you that you get a 0 or 1. So the fundamental difference between quantum physics and classical physics is that quantum physics is indeterminate, meaning it doesn't tell you, it only can tell you probability, but not the probability of what you will measure. No, the probability of all the possible things that you can measure.
Yeah.
Okay, and to go from this probability field to what you will measure, there is no physics. There is the collapse of the wave function. It's just a way of saying that we don't know. Basically, you go from, you have an interaction between the fields and an instrument that does a measurement, and somehow in this interaction you get one state. But that state that you get, you can only know the probability, and you don't know how you get that state. Not only that, but we know that that state is random, But also, their randomness is not algorithmic. It's beyond algorithms. And that's the rub. That's where free will is. In the theory with D'Ariano, we say free will is what is happening with what we call collapse of the wave function is a free will decision of the field of whatever particle you're measuring.
And because that's interesting, because I always thought that because the rule of large numbers, when we do quantum measurements over and over 1,000 times, then we get again a deterministic world, because you then just get a wave function that will give you sort of.
But inside the cell, you only get one. You do one thing at a time. You don't repeat the things.
Yeah, now I get it. That's crazy. That's crazy. Let's try and really understand this. Okay, classical information we can share because it's like a written word that we can kind of show around. I cannot show around what I'm feeling right now to all of you. So the moment I speak a word, I've made a feeling I had. I've turned it into classical information.
That's right. You take something which is private, that cannot be reproduced, can only be represented by quantum information. But the representation is not what you feel. The representation of reality is not reality. A theory of reality is not reality. Okay? So what you feel, only you field, not body, you field can actually know. And you know inside. And what you can say about what you feel is a small part of what you feel. Olivo's theorem, 1 bit per quantum bit. And the quantum bits are entangled, so they have states in common, with the bits don't have states in common. 0 or 1. There is nothing else. But quantum bits may have states in common, meaning that the two probabilities are connected. And to show this connection, you cannot do, you have to describe the quantum state in Hilbert space, which is an n-dimensional space with complex dimensions, where the dimensions are complex numbers. You know, it's just enough to give you a headache, right? But that's what you need. You cannot represent them in this way. So what does it mean? That there is a deeper reality where the feelings and the fields exist, the meaning of information exists, and from that world, you have this world that is a classical world where you can get classical information, and we think that the only world that exists is this world. But this world we have constructed with our bodies.
And is a way to look at it, I think you have this metaphor in silicon, that would it be like consciousness being the field, writing a book, and the book itself is our space-time dimension, our body sitting here?
Yeah.
Or a film, recording a film and showing it, the film shown on the screen of perception?
Yeah, but the book emerges into this three-dimensional reality, but the writer of the book is in a deeper, vaster reality.
It's not in the book.
It's not in the book.
And my body here is a sentence in that book.
The body is a symbol. It's a symbol of a complexity which is unfathomable for now.
Okay, people will find this crazy idea.
It is crazy,
yeah.
But it is much closer to the truth than what you get from the scientism.
Yeah, because that I wanted to ask. It's crazy, but quantum theory is crazy. So if we have the other explanation, if we don't want to go to consciousness, if we say no, it's still matter all the way down, how then, where do we then end up with in interpreting quantum mechanics? Then we have to go like many worlds, or how do you?
There is no interpretation that anybody can agree on. For 100 years, this problem has been discussed for 100 years, and there is no interpretation whatsoever about quantum physics.
Couldn't we say there's a multiverse with everything possible being possible in other dimensions?
Yeah, but it doesn't explain anything. What is it explaining? When I say consciousness and free will must be taken as foundational, as a postulate, okay? But why do I say that? Because postulates ought to be self-evident. The condition to accept a postulate is a self-evident. Why is it self-evident? Because you and I are conscious. You and I know that we have limited, but we have free will. Limited, but we have it. So we know already that. How can you explain free will and consciousness with something that doesn't have either? You cannot explain it. How can you explain consciousness with math when it's consciousness that created math? When can you explain free will with something that doesn't have free will? You see, it's foolish to think that, that you can explain, more with less. And today we talk about emergent properties. We explain everything with emergentism. What does it mean, emergentism? How can you get more with less? You cannot. You can get less from more. You can get determinism from indeterminism. You can get unconsciousness from consciousness, not the other way around. And that's so simple and so common sense. But science doesn't want to go there. Why? Scientism doesn't want to go there. Why? Because you lose your power. Because if I know the equations, I know more than you. And that's not acceptable. Because nobody knows the equations. Because there is no equations that describe free will. Free will is an act that no laws can tell what the free will can give you. And people want to predict the future. Their safety is in the prediction of the future. Their sense of power is in prediction of the future. You cannot predict the future because it's based on free will. Nobody wants to go there right now. But that's the only way to go, to be safe from this idea that we are machines and that artificial intelligence will best us.
Your postulate of free will, you experience free will, isn't that just an illusion? I mean, does free will truly exist, or is it something we think we have?
Why do you, people that say this, you have to ask them, why do you insist that there is no free will? What do you get by insisting that there is no free will? Think deeply about that. What do you get by thinking that there is no free will? That you do not have any free will? Why do you want that? And if you answer that question, they have to answer that question. But if they answer that question, they will find out more about themselves, and eventually they will have to agree that they have a hidden desire to control, to have power, because they know the equations. They know more than you. That's the point. I mean, I was there. I was, I had taken the same courses, I learned the same physics, and if I did not have this experience that told me that I'm more, I couldn't be here saying these things. But now I can, with this experience, I was able to invert our understanding and pointing the way to a different way to understand. So, if it's bullshit, it will be found to be bullshit. But don't say there is bullshit just because you don't want to even think about it. And that's the problem today. People, the first time they hear the wrong word from them, they shut off and they don't even want to think about it. But actually, the reason why we know is because we're conscious. The reason why we know is because we're conscious. Because consciousness is what allows us to know. Computers don't know. It's foolish to think that computers understand. They don't understand. There is no meaning in the bits. The meaning can only be quantum, can only be something that exists in the fields. It doesn't even exist in quantum information. Quantum information can only represent what we know as meaning. You see, mathematics stops there for now. But there is a new math to be developed to go from qualia, which is sensations and feelings, that can be represented by quantum information. Quantum information cannot represent the meaning, they represent the qualia. That's all they can do, which is how we feel. But qualia is the beginning of the inner journey. Qualia are the bringers of meaning. And we look for meaning. First comprehension, and then meaning. Comprehension gets you to meaning. Meaning is the essence of comprehension. Meaning is what you get after you got it. I got it. I understand it now. That's, that's beyond comprehension. Your comprehension is a path to meaning. And meaning is the ontology. The ontology is in the meaning, in the experience, in what we feel, and what we know from within, not outside.
If you say meaning is the ontology, so meaning is what ultimately exists in our universe?
Yeah. But in order to make it more understandable, I start with a postulate. I start this all basic reframing with a postulate because I'm joining science and spirituality. I'm joining the outer and the inner. Science is about the outer world, but meaning, experience, consciousness, free will is about the inner world. And right now they are separate. There is the spiritual people that think that this exists, but the scientists say that doesn't mean. These guys look at those guys and say matter doesn't care. So there is this separation now between science and spirituality. This way of thinking brings them together. They integrate them. Don't just oppose them. They integrate. They become one. They become one. So how do we start? So if we want to start like a new theory, I start with a postulate, because you have to, because you can never start with something that is true because you have shown to be true. You have to start with postulates. Even in math, you start with postulates that are taken to be true, and they have to be self-evident.
Yeah, it's your ground assumption.
Ground assumption, but that ground assumption has to be self-evident. The ground assumption of quantum physics, they are so self-evident that you have to study 10 years before you say, oh yeah, they are evident, not self-evident, they are evident after 10 years. So they don't pass the test of self-evidence to me. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a postulate that is self-evident. One, the totality of what exists, the totality of what exists, has three properties. Dynamic. Dynamic means it's never the same instant after instant. Is holistic, means it's not made of separable parts. And so far, I have described the universe described by quantum physics.
Yeah,
as all these three, is all there exists, dynamic, holistic. I add one more thing, one more quality. One wants to know itself. One wants to know itself. Now, this comes from perennial philosophy. Know thyself was in the Delphi, temple. It was part of the Greek, some of the Greek philosophers. But the Vedas were saying the same thing. All the basic experiences of the people that went deeper into the understanding of reality come to the same general conclusion that there is one that has those properties and they want to know itself. If I look within myself, what do I want to know when I was suffering? Who am I? Why am I here? Why am I suffering? What does it mean? Yeah, I want to know myself. So we all want to know ourselves. We all deep down, then we forget about it because we can do nothing about it. So we try to solve the problem by, going outside ourselves, and then we lose ourselves, like I did. And then, so if we start there, is it self-evident? It is self-evident to me. And if you think a little bit, it's self-evident to you. That is what you want, okay? So wanting means free will. Because if you are a machine, what do you want as a machine? The next state of the machine is already defined by the algorithm. What do you want? It doesn't make any sense. I don't want anything. But the question doesn't even make, there are no questions to a machine. There are only answers to a machine. So, and to know itself, one must be conscious. Because consciousness is what allows one to know itself. So I have defined free will and consciousness. And why are those self-evident? Because you are conscious and you have free will, and I'm conscious and I have free will. So more self-evident than that, what is there? And if I start there, I can explain quantum physics by that postulate. I can explain what physicists in 100 years have not understood. Quantum information is the representation of inner experience, and the collapse of the wave function is the representation of the free will. What more do you want?
I think it's a great theory, because in bridging, as you say, science and spirituality, the two are thought very distinct and very separate, right? Because well, it makes me think, I interviewed Donald Hoffman, who you know, right? I think your foundation supports his work,
yes.
right?
Yeah, for about 5 years.
And he said something that stuck with me, that he said that all these spiritual traditions, that in a sense are saying what you are saying, that consciousness is fundamental, one wants to know itself, and then we have all the incarnation stories of the gods who incarnate, etc. So we know those stories. But the fact that they've always remained so elusive, so mystical, he said, is nothing to be proud of. We should be like more concrete. We have also our rational faculty, we have science, so we now need to approach this with our sort of scientific mindset. So is that what you're trying to do here, right?
What is more concrete than what I just said?
Yeah. And can it lead?
I mean, you know, now if you start here, we can show that science, not science, the quantum physics out of which everything else emerges, in fact, quantum information, because the quantum state that is a representation of our experience is what then eventually determines the outer world, okay? So I show that by starting with the something that is kind of ha-ha, you know, but it doesn't get you anywhere, actually needs the physics that exists. And now from there we go, we already solved the other problems. I'm not changing anything of physics. I'm reinterpreting completely what physics has been talking about. What do you want more? Is that Don wants to explain consciousness with mathematics, and you cannot do that, because consciousness creates mathematics. I wanted to do the same thing for many years, and then I found out that I was wrong, that it is consciousness that explains math, and therefore you go from consciousness to math. You cannot go from math to consciousness, because where does math come from otherwise? Who created math? God? Well, come on. Yeah, how does math exist? It's our creation.
In the human mind.
You bet.
Federico, it was your intuition that led to your inventions that have changed the world. I think it's fair to say that, or helped change the world. Now you have this grand intuition, your theory about consciousness. How can this also lead to technology or to something tangible? Can we test it? Is it falsifiable?
Of course it is. In fact, the next step is to, now that I have a theory which is absolutely perfect, in meaning it can be falsified, it can make, you know, predictions, and you can test the prediction.
Can you name one?
Oh yes, I can predict, you know, that trees are conscious, and I can make experiments that show that trees are conscious, okay, and trees have no brain. So consciousness that is supposed to be coming off our brain, it comes off a tree that has no brain. Look at that. What do you think of that?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Is this being done?
And I will do that.
Now...
I will do that.
Yeah?
I cannot tell you how, because I have to prove it, and don't worry about it. I will do that.
And all right, okay. Trees are, yeah, but you actually have a method, a scientific method of testing this theory.
Yes, I will not discuss it any further. I will say, you know, would you agree with me that if I do that, I have disproved that consciousness is a product of the human brain or of the animal brain?
Definitely.
Is that good?
Definitely.
All right,
Definitely.
I will do that. That's a deal.
Then you have proven that it takes cells, right? Then we are sort of on a cellular
Absolutely.
level. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I will prove that.
Yeah, you're sure of that?
Absolutely. Take me to task. I'll get it. I can guarantee you that I will get it. There's something that people say, oh, they cannot say anything. They will not have any objection anymore. See, entanglement took over 30 years to prove that entanglement exists after the first experiment showed it exists, because scientists didn't want entanglement. Einstein didn't want entanglement, so everybody, Einstein, how can Einstein be wrong? So for 50 years, you couldn't do the experiments, okay? Finally, when you could do experiments, the first experiment that proved that, Alain Aspect, he got the Nobel Prize 4 years ago, what he did. Anyway, he did that, okay? Then, oh, you did wrong, you couldn't do, blah, blah, blah. It took more than 30 years after that to, cancel all the objections, show that the objections were not valid. And finally, everybody now has to accept that there is entanglement, but nobody can explain it. Entanglement is what connects everything from the inside. It's what allows the world to be holistic, which is already what quantum physics is saying.
Yeah. Are you predicting, many people think of AI, a sort of an invention that you were at the birth at, right, with in your work on neural networks?
Yeah, back in the 80s, the second part of the 80s, yeah.
People now think that AI will cause a paradigm shift. What's your response to that? Do you think that AI
No, only this theory will cause a paradigm shift. And not because it's a theory that I developed, but only by changing the understanding of who we are can change a paradigm. In fact, the paradigm ends with AI. This paradigm of scientism ends with AI. Because AI is saying machines will be better than us, which is crazy. Why does anybody want AI, despite that, why does anybody want AI to be better than us? But AI cannot be better than us, because creativity is non-algorithmic. It's not changing things randomly. And, because besides, even if AI gives you a good idea, AI doesn't know that it is a good idea. You recognize the good idea of AI.
Still needs
with your consciousness, with your understanding, with your comprehension. And that's why AI can help us. And I applaud what has happened to AI, but not the AI bests us and not the way AI, unfortunately, will be used to monetize us. That's not acceptable.
I agree. I think you would also fully agree to that quote by Nikola Tesla, right? He has this famous saying that the moment science will start studying consciousness, more will be achieved in a decade than in the whole history of science.
Absolutely, because we change the way we are. Thoughts are more important than stuff, right? From the inside you get the outside, not vice versa. And science doesn't recognize the existence of the inside, because consciousness is phenomenon of the brain. The brain makes the decision that informs your consciousness. We don't know what it is, but it doesn't have any causal power, so who cares? Once people are convinced that we are conscious, that we are fields, that when the body dies, we don't die. That's a good news, right? People want you to discharge your consciousness and experience on the computer and live forever, for Christ's sake. You know about transhumanism. Why do we need to do that? Besides, you need to have a lot of money to pay for 1 billion years of electricity to keep you alive in a computer. So this is only a good recipe for very rich people, right? To live forever on a computer. The computer sucks energy, right? So to make you live forever, you have to have a lot of money before you die to give to people that tell you that you continue to die. Are you sure that you will be continue to die in a computer, 1,000 years later?
I fully agree. Where could this lead to, if that Tesla quote is true, if we would fully dedicate ourselves in trying to understand consciousness with your theory, even build technology with it, where could we be in a decade? Could we break out of space-time? Could we sort of live forever? What are your thoughts?
Once you understand that consciousness is beyond matter, beyond this space and time, we already know that we can explore this world by going out of body with our consciousness. And millions of people that go out of body explores other realities. Consciousness is the tool for knowing, infinitely more powerful than any instrument that we have ever built. We build billions of dollars of instruments to find out what the particles, are doing, but consciousness is far, far richer. So we basically, then we can begin to explore the universe, the invisible universe.
What mystics and sort of sages and in religions have been doing for thousands of years, but also a bit in a way that sometimes led to the waging of wars because people want to again sort of use it for politics. Can we transcend that then? What is the ultimate dream you have for society?
But when you understand who you are, you know that the only way to work together is cooperation, not competition. Today, there is only competition. Today, the purpose of life is the survival of the fittest. Is there anything worse than that as a purpose of life? Besides, if you ask me, how do you define fitness? The only definition that they would give you is, fitter is the one that survives. So what kind of a law is that? The survival of the what survives? I mean, it's tautology. It's not even informative. So we believe, but that definition of life is so wrong because it basically impedes you to be cooperative, impedes us to work together, to understand. But once you have a direct experience of who you are, when you are the observer and the observed, you know directly who you are. And when you know that only cooperation is the game. We have to work together. That's the only way. So competition will die off just by that experience. I cannot be competitive after that experience. It's impossible. Competition is not the competition. The competition that is allowed is that competition that allows me, not me to win, me to be better than what I was the day before.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the only competition that makes sense.
If one wants to know itself and it's only one, then also
you're competing with yourself.
With one is competing with one. Yeah.
But that's not competition. Yeah. There's actually the urge to self-development, to be more than you were.
If we have one on the ultimate level in the quantum fields, in the unified field, right? How then do we have? How do we get to the many? How do we get to sort of still on a quantum level? You talk about seities, right? How does one get to different or gazillions of seities?
Yeah. So if we start from that principle, that postulate, then one wants to know itself, right? So the moment that one knows itself, it has to know completely itself, because it's not made of parts. It cannot know a part of itself. It has to know the totality of itself. But to know itself, it has to, you have a flash, and it cannot happen in different times. It has to happen in an instant that knows itself, in its own totality. In that instant, it creates a part whole of itself.
Just like a meiosis, right? The splitting of cells.
Absolutely. That's where life takes form. Life is the reproduction of one. It's so fundamental that it is the reproduction of one. One knowing itself creates another one, part whole though, because it creates many, so it cannot be the totality. So it cannot copy itself, but it creates what it saw, what it got, what it understood itself to be. That's the identity of the field the one is created.
It's not a copy, you say, but it is a part whole.
One is looking at itself in one direction, and one is infinite direction in which it can know itself. The next time that it looks at itself in a different direction is another part whole, is another monad. Leibniz got it right. Leibniz was the only philosopher, scientist, mathematician, technologist. I mean, it was an incredible mind. He got it right. He understood that, but it was before quantum physics. It was, it was way before, we could make sense of it, but he got it right. And I call him, before I knew, because I didn't study philosophy, I got into what philosophers have been saying by inner experiences, and then thinking about it, trying to understand them scientifically and understand them rationally. And I found that many people have said the same things that I came up to through this process, to this inner process, not by reading books and repeating what I read.
Yeah. So the satiety, that is sort of...
The satiety is what I call a field that is conscious and has free will and wants to know itself. I call them satiety to distinguish them from the quantum fields, which don't have consciousness, free will, and don't want to know themselves. So, but they have all the characteristics of the quantum fields in the terms of what you can explain of them based on physics. But they go beyond that because their inner life, is beyond physics. So physics can only explain qualia, which is the entry point to the inner world. But from qualia to meaning, as I said, there is comprehension, then meaning, is all new physics. And new physics can only go up to a certain point, and then you have to leave even physics. It's got to go to what we now call metaphysics, but it's what can only be known from the inside. But, it will take many centuries to go through. But the key thing, though, it shows that physics now is incomplete because it doesn't even allow the inner world to exist. And the reason why they struggle for 80 years to unify quantum physics and general relativity is because the fundamental concepts of time, space, matter, and energy are wrong. Then they're almost right, but they're not exact, not so close to the truth that they allow you to bridge those, to bring together into a unified physical field what is now two separate, one is a set of fields and the other one is the, space-time.
Yeah.
And gravity. Yeah.
And if we say the satiety is
the state is who we are.
Yeah, exactly. It's who we are, right? And
yeah. It's a quantum field with this characteristic.
Yeah.
But an identity. My identity is how one has seen itself when he created me.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. You're like a frame at a certain moment of the universe.
Imagine, it's a beautiful way to understand this. Imagine that you have a multidimensional thing, okay? It's a multidimensional object, multidimensional meaning in n, where n is potentially infinite dimensions. How can you know this object? You can know this object by looking at this object through all the dimensions that are orthogonal that allow you to look at this object. Each look, you see something, then the next look, you look. So you're doing a tomography of an n-dimensional thing. So is one doing a tomography on itself, you see?
Yeah. And what happens, for people to understand, what happens when we die? And the satiety?
We don't go anywhere because we never were in the body. It's the body that dies. We don't die.
But something changes, right? So because the satiety...
Of course, the satiety that... See, a portion of the satiety called ego is the portion of the satiety that thinks to be the body. When the body... And so it looks at the information that the body provides about what? About this other world seen through the body. So our senses, our brain, takes information from here, but a most small part of information. Just the visual thing that we see, is this narrow band, right? If I had cell phones instead of eyes, I would actually now be able to listen in to the 30,000 conversations that are going on that are here. They're all here.
Yeah.
And I could see them, I could hear them, I could do this. But I only see this band. There is no communication in this band. There are other stuff, and we see this world. We construct it with the body. The output of the body, which is in the cells, is quantum. That quantum output is what the fields perceive as color, shapes, sounds, and so on. The qualia do not exist in the body. They exist in the field. And the qualia are representable with quantum state. quantum state is how the quantum field translates this information in the cells, which is, I call it live information. It's a type of information that has not been studied at all, not even imagined at all, which is in between quantum information and classical information. It is the stuff that makes the cell work. Because if you take an electron is matter, energy, and information. Can you separate these three in an electron? It's elementary particles. There you go. Yeah. So they are connected.
And it's like in the cells, there's no distinction between hardware and software, right? They're like totally mingled.
That's right. In a computer, they are separated because a computer is a deterministic, reductionistic structure.
Yeah.
Not a cell. Not the deeper aspect of reality.
But basically, you're saying, so when the moment I die, the everything, consciousness remains just this narrow-banded, avatar-like VR headset that expands like...
Yeah. Well, basically, I kind of say in the book, Irreducible, I explain this by saying, imagine that you control a drone. We are a body, controls a drone that is in Afghanistan, watching around and semi-autonomous, so I don't have to worry about I only have to express where I want it to go. So high-level language, say move right or whatever, drop the bomb or whatever, because that's what we do with drones these days. But but anyway, so now the drone looks at that reality where it is, sends me information, and I get the conscious experience of what the drone is seeing. That conscious experience is not in my body, is in my consciousness. And based on that, and based on my free will, I'll tell the drone what to do. The drone doesn't know anything. Now, take this image. Oh, and when somebody
shoots it down,
shoot it down, you were so focused on that drone that you only saw what the drone was seeing because you were piloting it and you were concentrated. Then when the drone doesn't send you an signal, you look around and you say, oh my God, there is another world here. You see?
Yeah.
That's the same thing. The ego, when the body dies, it doesn't look at the signals of the body anymore. And he looks around and says, oh shit, wow, look at this.
And is it then, are we sitting there then, say at this level, quantum, saying, okay, let's go in again, here's another headset, try this one on, and whoop, there we are again in a baby.
Perhaps, but I cannot tell you what happens afterwards, but certainly there are lots of, near-death experiences that are actually, giving you evidence of what I'm saying. People that arrive at the hospital, heart doesn't beat, brain doesn't have any electrical signals, they are clinically dead. They're not dead clearly if they are resuscitated, but they are, for all practical purposes, dead, okay? And they have an experience in the hospital. They see themselves in the operating table. They later tell what's going on, while the brain has no electrical signal. The brain is not functioning. So how can you be outside of the body looking down at your body in the operating table? That cannot be explained, right? But of course, now people say, the scientists say, well, it's a fantasy. Oh, come on, it's impossible, so that's it. But that's what they do. Then they move outside of they move in a different environment. They meet people, their parents that were dead and friends that were dead. In some cases, they meet a friend that they didn't know that he was dead. Then when they wake up, they find out that he died the day before and they didn't know, and they met this person in that a reality, vaster reality. They have an experience of expansion, of love and joy and peace. And then somebody tells them, you have to go back because you haven't done what you came to this world to do. And then they wake up in the post-operating room.
But in that sort of drone metaphor, trying to understand this, I've always, what I find hard to understand, okay, so if my body is this drone or avatar or just a headset, then say the moment it dies, what headset are you putting on to have just hover around and in this in-between space? Is that another headset or another?
That's a good question. I'm asking that question, and there may be, in fact, it's likely that there is another body. I mean, people that have studied this thing talk about an astral body.
Exactly, stuff like that.
Or etheric body, and, so clearly there is another body. If this is true, but I believe it's true, I actually went out of body too, so I know that it's not imagination. You know that you're out of body. Like when this energy came out of me, it was energy, it was physical. It was not, it was not imagination, it was physical. Like an hydrant. How can I make it up?
So there are lots of levels to get to one. There are many levels in between.
Oh my goodness. I mean, the quantum field of electrons is, in this theory, is conscious and has free will, and he knows itself. Look at then what are the electrons doing? The electrons are the symbols that the quantum field uses to communicate with other fields. All the electrons in the universe. How many electrons are in the universe? 10 to the 82, 83, 85, I don't know, but numbers that are unimaginable, just the field of electrons. And all these electrons are its communication to the other fields to know itself.
How many quantum fields are there, or can there be?
17.
Yeah. I'm asking because people, also call it QIP, right? Quantum Information Panpsychism.
Yeah.
And panpsychism is, of course, I know your version of it is different, but is sort of being criticized for the fact that you have the combination problem, right? Why?
Oh, but there is no combination problem. The combination problem only in classical panpsychism. People never have a theory. Nobody had a theory of quantum panpsychism. The combination problem is not a problem in quantum panpsychism. When you combine states, quantum states, you create a new state which is more than the sum of the parts.
And you can do that infinitely. You can keep on doing that.
You can keep on going. Of course you can.
Yeah.
So we have solved that problem. I mean, people that say that, they don't understand what they're saying, or they don't understand what we have developed, this theory. Quantum, the combination problem is solved completely.
Yeah.
It's classical panpsychism that doesn't solve the problem, because in classical physics, the whole is only the sum of the parts. You cannot create a whole that is more than the sum of the parts. And that's why I was criticizing emergentism before, because many physicists think that there is emergent properties in the purely classical world. It cannot be. Emergentism requires quantumness. And they don't realize, because there is no boundary between classical and quantum, and so there is a seeping from quantum, you go to classical, and then they call emergent property as if it came from the classical. No, every creation comes from the quantum world, from the inner world.
Is there an endpoint to the universe, in the sense that no, you already said that. The moment it knows itself, it splits off again in another part whole. So this will keep on going forever?
In this theory, yes. But who knows, right? I mean, but certainly there is there cannot be any end. And the reason is that, you know that yourself, the more you know, the more there is to know, because to know more, you make connections, new connections. And as you make new connections, you open up other possibilities. So it is an explosive thing. And again, purely, this is hypothetical, but I think it has possible legs. Why is space expanding faster than light at the edges? Because it's basically there is space is like a balloon that inflates, and this is the very
inflation.
Inflation. Now, the inflation was the early part of the universe. This is not called inflation. This is just this is a consequence of having found that the universe is expanding exponentially in the horizon. So, which can only be explained if there is the universe is growing, the space is growing from within. Okay, in my model, space is the memory of the self-knowing of one. And because one knows ever more about itself, space must inflate, must grow exponentially. And you know that quantum states only exist within a very narrow present. So in order to remember your experience, you must put it into long-term memory. That's our theory also, is selling that very clearly. So now, this present enriches itself of all the past that you have experienced. But when you want to experience that past, you can only experience that in the present. So experience can only exist in the present.
Here you and Bernardo can shake hands as well. And okay, so free will is fundamental. Consciousness is, and the universe wants to know itself. But does it also create a consciousness, a satiety that has a sort of a purpose? Do you think you were born with a certain purpose, or sort of that?
I think so.
Yeah?
I think so. And the reason why I am at peace with myself and happy about, my life, what I do, is because I know that I'm doing what I came here to do. I know it, because how can I wake up with new ideas. Why? But they're all all this stuff that I'm talking to you about. It's like my mind keeps on running around finding out where there are holes that understanding is now complete or whatever. Why am I doing that?
It's beautiful, and what it sort of rings with me is that the universe then somehow is thinking to itself, okay, let's look to me because it's one from this different perspective, and let's really do that. Let's become Federico, let's become Hans, let's become.
That's right.
And really look at ourselves from that perspective.
From that perspective, and then but then you and I can know each other, can enter into resonance by communicating, because I cannot directly give you what I know and what I feel, right? And likewise for you. So we had to communicate, and that communication brings into inner resonance. And if we keep on doing that, after a while, if we can create the same state internally, you and I, from that unity of state, then that's like the quantum superposition. Then you get a new entity. But that new entity does not destroy who we are. Basically, we can create another society like us, like one create, because we have the same properties of one, right? Except with one point of view instead of the multiplicity of points of view of one. So I can create another society like myself, but not copy myself. So when we reach that, you and I create another society, and the two join and they become one, which is with the 2 points of view join, the 2 points of view, mine and yours, they now become a new combined point of view that now has its own life, and it proceeds to know itself.
What that takes is like truly connecting. You said becoming into resonance, which is something different than just exchanging classical information, right?
Yeah, that's right. But that resonance means is a new quantum state. We are building a new quantum state, which is a common understanding. That common understanding creates a new society of a higher level. So we create a hierarchy of societies. So we are a very high level, but there are still many levels above us.
And this is where things can take off, because if we look at the world right now, at AI, we're talking classical information. We're shutting ourselves off behind screens, sharing classical information, which are bits. It's not this information you're talking about.
Not at all. Not at all. And besides, we gave that knowledge to the computer. It didn't build it itself. I mean, we gave him the data, we exposed him to that information, even if it's, in order to do everything by itself. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. It's some bullshit. I mean, and yet it's very useful. So I'm actually happy with, if AI was used properly, it could speed up our self-knowing and everything else very rapidly. But I'm afraid that if we don't change, it will not be used in this form.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you so much, Federico.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a great talk. Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.